What if everything we believed about Meghan Markle's pregnancies was nothing more than a perfectly staged illusion? In a stunning turn, Prince Harry has reportedly confessed the truth behind the birth of Archie and Lilibet, and it's not what the world was led to believe. According to insiders, Meghan never carried the children herself. Instead, a secret surrogate delivered both babies, while Meghan appeared in public wearing a lifelike prosthetic bump. Every movement rehearsed, every image tightly controlled. Why go to such lengths? What were they hiding? And who inside the palace helped protect the lie? In the next moments, we pull back the curtain on a deception years in the making. What you're about to hear will shake the very foundation of royal trust. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The cameras flashed relentlessly as Meghan Markle stepped out onto the red carpet of public expectation, a radiant smile across her face and one hand gently cradling what the world believed was a growing royal heir. It was the image of modern royalty, a biracial American duchess, pregnant with the next generation of Windsor blood. The press marveled, fans wept tears of joy, and the narrative of healing, progress, and family legacy was broadcast globally. But what if none of it was real? In a quiet room thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace, Prince Harry sat across from a trusted confidant. His tone was hesitant, his eyes tired. And then, with a pause that seemed to choke him, he spoke the words that would unravel the carefully preserved illusion. "My wife can't give birth to children." That one sentence shattered the illusion the world had bought into for years. Behind the curated social media posts, the glamorous public engagements, and the carefully posed portraits, there was something else. A secret tightly controlled. A deception meticulously choreographed. And a truth so potentially damaging it was buried under layers of security protocols, legal barriers, and palace-approved talking points. What followed was an explosive revelation that pulled back the curtain on one of the most tightly guarded chapters in modern royal history. According to sources close to the Sussexes and corroborated by discreet insiders within the royal household, Meghan Markle never carried either of the children, Archie Harrison or Lilibet Diana. Instead, she allegedly wore a prosthetic bump for all public appearances while the real pregnancy was outsourced, hidden from the public eye, wrapped in ironclad non-disclosure agreements, and buried under a narrative of empowerment and maternal grace. This video dives deep into the explosive confession made by Prince Harry. We dissect the origins of this carefully crafted illusion, trace the decision to use a surrogate, and examine how the deception was maintained for so long despite rumors, inconsistencies, and widespread skepticism. We'll investigate the psychological toll it took on Harry, the consequences of keeping such a high-stakes secret, and the backlash it sparked inside the royal family. We will also hear from sources who allege they witnessed the truth behind the scenes, former palace aides, legal experts, and surrogacy insiders. Their accounts will paint a hauntingly different picture of what really happened behind those royal walls. This is not just a story of surrogacy. This is about optics, manipulation, legacy, and control. It's about how power can bend perception, and how one couple's desperate need to protect their image may have turned into the most elaborate charade the royal family has ever seen. But before we dive into the details of secret pacts and manufactured public displays, let's go back to the moment it all began, when Meghan Markle first joined the royal family, and the global press turned its gaze toward a new, modern fairy tale. From the very beginning, Meghan's entrance into the royal institution was different. She was not British. She was not aristocratic. She was not from a long line of nobility. Instead, she was an actress, a divorcee, and a woman of color. These facts alone upended centuries of royal tradition. But they also made her the symbol of change the monarchy desperately needed. The House of Windsor had long been viewed as an outdated institution clinging to old rules and older faces. Meghan represented hope, diversity, and a global sensibility. The wedding was an international event. The moment Harry and Meghan walked down the aisle at St. George's Chapel, the crown seemed to shed some of its outdated skin. Global media praised the royal family for evolving. In interviews, Harry spoke of finding true love, of escaping the rigidity of palace life, and of starting fresh with Meghan. She spoke of feminism, of empowerment, of being a modern duchess. That narrative became the lifeline for the Sussex brand. But along with that brand came expectations. The British press and the monarchy's internal machinery expected the couple to play by the rules, at least on the surface. And part of those rules included royal lineage. The production of an heir and a spare has always been an unspoken royal obligation. For centuries, that duty fell heavily upon the women who married into the institution. They were expected to bear children, and to do so in a way that reinforced tradition. And although times had changed, the public hunger for royal babies remained the same. When Meghan announced her first pregnancy, the world rejoiced. It came during a royal tour of Australia, and the headlines spread like wildfire. Kensington Palace confirmed it within hours. Royal watchers celebrated the arrival of a new Windsor. But almost instantly, the skepticism began. Online forums noted the way Meghan's bump appeared to change size. Photos surfaced of her bending, kneeling, and squatting with ease, movements typically difficult during later stages of pregnancy. Wardrobe malfunctions showed hard angles under her dresses. Still, the mainstream media ignored the noise. To question a royal pregnancy was considered distasteful, borderline conspiracy theory. The palace responded with silence. Meghan, meanwhile, continued the charade with poise. Every public outing was a performance, her hand always cradling her stomach, her smile always perfectly measured, the narrative always framed around maternal bliss. The media willingly played along, eager to reinforce the story of transformation. And perhaps most importantly, Harry never wavered. Not publicly, but behind the scenes, things were different. According to insiders familiar with the couple's private discussions, the decision to use a surrogate wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned for months, perhaps even before the wedding. Medical issues allegedly made it impossible for Meghan to carry a child to term. Whether due to past procedures or inherited conditions, doctors advised against natural pregnancy. The couple, desperate to maintain their public image and fulfill royal expectations, decided on a secret surrogacy path. That choice alone was not illegal. In fact, it was a deeply personal and private medical decision. But what made it controversial was the elaborate effort to disguise it. Instead of announcing their use of a surrogate, as other public figures have done, they concealed it entirely. No surrogate was named. No medical staff attached to Meghan's care was ever publicly identified. There were no photos of prenatal hospital visits. The birth itself was handled in secrecy, with the birth certificate for Archie listing Meghan as the biological mother, a detail many believe is factually false. For Harry, the decision to lie came with a cost. He had always hated the press. In his memoir, he writes of growing up under constant media surveillance, watching how the tabloids hounded his mother, and how the monarchy did little to shield her. He had long harbored a desire to protect his wife and future children from that same fate. So when it came time to reveal the origins of Archie and Lilibet, Harry reportedly chose secrecy over scandal. He convinced himself it was the right thing to do, that protecting Meghan's image and his children's future was worth the lie. But lies, especially royal ones, don't stay buried forever. Staff members began to ask questions. Some were fired. Others left quietly, burdened by what they had seen but too afraid to speak. A few years later, began to leak details under anonymity. They described sealed hospital wings, closed-door meetings with lawyers, and private flights for a woman no one could identify. They described Meghan obsessing over public image, rehearsing how she would walk with her bump, and demanding complete control over all photographs released to the public. By the time Lilibet was born, the operation had become even more complex. The couple had moved to California. They were no longer active royals. And yet, the need to maintain the narrative remained. Lilibet was introduced to the world via carefully edited images. No doctors were interviewed. No birthing details were shared. The name itself, Lilibet, was wrapped in controversy, as the Queen had reportedly not been properly asked permission. Still, the world moved on. Questions remained unanswered, but the media was distracted by Netflix deals, Spotify controversies, and explosive interviews. The pregnancy deception slipped further into the shadows. Until now. What makes Harry's confession so extraordinary is not just the content, it's the timing. He is no longer a working royal. He and Meghan have carved out their own empire, albeit one facing serious public scrutiny and financial instability. Perhaps the guilt finally became too much. Perhaps a sense of personal integrity demanded the truth come out. Or maybe, as some insiders suggest, it was Harry's last-ditch effort to salvage his credibility after years of conflicting narratives and media distrust. Whatever the reason, the consequences of this revelation are seismic. The implications extend beyond personal embarrassment. If Meghan was not the biological mother of Archie and Lilibet, what does that mean for their standing in the royal lineage? How does the monarchy respond when its line of succession is built on a false narrative? What of the public trust that has been repeatedly manipulated in favor of optics? This story is not about attacking surrogacy. It is about transparency, accountability, and the difference between privacy and deception. The world has a right to question narratives when they are manufactured at the highest levels of power and influence. And now that Prince Harry has begun to speak, the time for polite silence is over. The rest of this video will pull back every layer of this extraordinary royal cover-up. We will explore the hidden machinery that enabled it, the people who kept the secret, and the cost of sustaining the illusion. From palace whispers to surrogate testimonies, from prosthetic baby bumps to legal contracts hidden from public view, this is the story of how the world's most famous couple orchestrated one of the greatest deceptions of the modern royal era. When the world first saw Meghan Markle step into the royal spotlight, the narrative was already in place. She was the actress-turned-duchess, the breath of fresh air injecting diversity and relatability into the centuries-old royal institution. A modern woman with a global outlook, a strong voice, and a seemingly effortless charm. She embodied transformation. The British monarchy, often accused of being slow to adapt, suddenly appeared more inclusive, more empathetic, more in touch with a new generation. And nothing symbolized that evolution more powerfully than the moment Meghan was announced to be expecting a royal baby. The announcement came during the couple's royal tour of Australia, New Zealand, Tonga, and Fiji in October 2018. It was a strategic choice. By delivering the news overseas, the Sussexes turned the pregnancy into a global event. Local newspapers in Sydney screamed headlines about a royal baby down under. Crowds gathered in excitement. Social media erupted in celebration. Meghan's team had timed it perfectly. But beneath the smiles and baby-themed gift exchanges with adoring fans, a perfectly staged drama was unfolding, one that required meticulous preparation and relentless consistency. From the moment of the announcement, Meghan's every public appearance became a visual spectacle. Her outfits were chosen to emphasize the growing bump, her hand constantly rested on her stomach, and photographers were given ideal angles to frame the perfect shot. Every appearance was a statement. Her maternity wardrobe was as carefully crafted as a film costume department. Loose but not shapeless. Bold but not gaudy. Always allowing the bump to take center stage. Royal watchers, trained to decode subtle cues and gestures, were fascinated. Body language analysts dissected each movement, each smile, each shift in posture. At first, the reviews were glowing. She was hailed as the most fashionable royal mother-to-be since Diana. But the more frequently she appeared, the more inconsistencies began to surface. Viewers noticed how her bumps sometimes appeared larger or smaller than in previous outings. In some instances, it seemed to vanish altogether, only to reappear days later looking more prominent. Speculation, initially dismissed as trolling or misogyny, started to find a foothold in more serious conversations. Forums and social platforms discussed unusual footage, videos of Meghan bending down effortlessly to pick something off the ground, even late into the supposed third trimester. Some viewers highlighted the angle of the bump when she sat down, the lack of a visible belly button protrusion, and the strange, angular shapes visible under her dresses. Most telling were the rare wardrobe malfunctions, tight fabric that wrinkled unnaturally, bulges that didn't move fluidly, and moments where the bump seemed to shift or fold. Still, the palace held firm. The media outlets continued to publish glowing articles. Critics were labeled conspiracy theorists. But for those watching closely, the stagecraft was becoming difficult to ignore. The deeper question wasn't just about whether the bump was real. It was why it mattered so much to present it in a specific way. The answer lies in optics, in the unique pressures faced by royals, especially women who marry into the family. Pregnancy, in royal circles, has always been more than a biological event. It is a symbol of continuity, of legitimacy, of tradition. A royal mother isn't just raising a child, she's bearing the next generation of monarchs. Her fertility becomes a national interest. Her image becomes political currency. Meghan was acutely aware of this dynamic. Her background in Hollywood had already conditioned her to understand the power of visuals. Her entire public persona was built on controlling perception. She had walked red carpets, starred in primetime TV, and managed interviews with precision. She knew how to tell a story without speaking a word. So when it came to projecting the image of a pregnant duchess, she didn't leave it to chance. According to former staff members who have since spoken off the record, Meghan was deeply involved in every aspect of how her pregnancy was presented. She approved every photo released to the media. She reviewed footage before it aired. She even reportedly practiced her public walk in front of mirrors, adjusting how she carried the bump to ensure consistency. Staff were instructed to coordinate schedules around specific lighting conditions and ideal photo opportunities. What the public saw wasn't just a woman expecting a baby. It was a calculated, continuously rehearsed performance. Yet behind the poise and glamour was a silence that spoke volumes. Meghan rarely allowed journalists to ask follow-up questions about her pregnancy. No medical team was publicly identified. There were no interviews with doctors or midwives, no detailed descriptions of her prenatal care, no insider features with maternity hospitals. This was unusual by royal standards. In previous royal pregnancies, such as Kate Middleton's, details had been sparse but credible: official bulletins, clearly named hospitals, and verified birth certificates. In Meghan's case, there was mystery, vagueness, and secrecy. That secrecy deepened when it came time for the birth. The couple declined to follow royal tradition by appearing outside the hospital with the newborn, as both Princess Diana and the Duchess of Cambridge had done. Instead, the Sussexes issued a vague statement about Meghan going into labor, hours after the child had reportedly already been born. They later released a tightly edited photo of the baby with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, a curious image where Meghan seemed unusually posed and the baby's features were almost entirely hidden. Adding to the strangeness, there was confusion about the exact location of the birth. Some sources claimed Meghan gave birth at Portland Hospital in London, while others suggested a private wing that was never disclosed. The lack of transparency only fueled suspicion. When the official birth certificate was released, it named Meghan as the mother and Harry as the father, but skeptics pointed out that such documents can be filled out based on declaration, not verified medical evidence. All of this might have remained a fringe theory if not for the cracks that started to form in the Sussexes' public image. As the couple stepped back from royal duties and moved to California, they reinvented themselves as social justice advocates, media entrepreneurs, and victims of institutional mistreatment. But along with their evolving brand came heightened scrutiny. Their Oprah interview, while widely viewed, was also widely fact-checked. Several claims they made were later disproven or contradicted by official records. It was in this environment of skepticism that people returned to the original pregnancy narrative with renewed interest. Journalists began to dig. Former aides who had previously stayed silent began to leak stories, and the portrait of a manufactured illusion began to take shape. Among the more damning details were those involving clothing stylists and personal assistants who allegedly handled Meghan's prosthetic bump. According to one source familiar with the operation, Meghan kept several different versions of the bump, varying in size depending on what stage of pregnancy she was meant to be portraying. These silicone inserts were stored in a custom-designed wardrobe truck. Staff were forbidden to speak of it under strict non-disclosure agreements. But years later, some felt compelled to speak, citing a sense of betrayal and disillusionment with how events had unfolded. One assistant recalled a moment before a public appearance where the bump was incorrectly positioned, creating an unnatural bulge. Meghan reportedly became furious, demanding that the wardrobe team fix it immediately. The event was delayed. The press outside remained unaware. The bump was adjusted, the dress smoothed, the smile returned, and Meghan stepped out to a sea of flashing lights, none the wiser. The level of control extended to social media. The couple's official Instagram account featured stylized images of Meghan during the pregnancy period, but none showed her in motion or in natural, candid situations. Every image was curated, every caption carefully crafted. And though public support was high, cracks began to appear in the facade. Questions about authenticity became more difficult to suppress. Now that the image has cracked, the real story begins to emerge. It began not with a royal press release, not with an interview, not even with a carefully worded memoir entry, but with a whisper, spoken behind closed doors by a man who had spent the better part of his life under the blinding lights of relentless scrutiny. Prince Harry's confession did not erupt from a podium or a studio set. It emerged in fragments. Pieces of a much larger puzzle dropped in intimate conversations, off-the-record chats, and personal writings meant, at first, never to see the light of day. The first clue came from a conversation recounted by a former royal staffer who had remained close to Harry even after the couple's departure from official duties. During a private evening in Montecito, after several drinks and with the children already asleep, Harry allegedly leaned forward and, almost in a whisper, let the truth slip out. We didn't want the world to know the truth. Meghan can't have children. It was a simple sentence, devoid of theatrics or dramatics, but it changed everything. It contradicted years of carefully controlled narratives, professional photography, heartfelt interviews, and glowing documentaries. If true, it confirmed what many had suspected but had dared not speak aloud. Meghan's pregnancies were never real. The impact of such a statement could not be overstated. For years, the public had watched the royal couple through the lens of admiration and controversy alike. They had defended themselves from accusations of manipulation, media exploitation, and public deception. Harry in particular had positioned himself as the protector, shielding Meghan from royal rigidity and tabloid cruelty. And now he was admitting that they had participated in one of the most carefully maintained illusions in modern royal history. According to sources close to the couple, this wasn't an isolated moment of candor. In recent months, as Harry grew increasingly distant from royal life and reportedly felt the emotional and psychological strain of the California bubble, he began to talk more openly. During therapy sessions, he allegedly expressed deep guilt over the deception. He confided in close friends, revealing that the decision to fake the pregnancies wasn't made lightly, but once they set that course, there was no way back. One friend described Harry's mental state as tormented, particularly when discussing Archie and Lilibet. He loves his children, the source said, but he's haunted by how they came into the world and the fact that he's had to lie about it every single day. It's killing him inside. The origins of the decision are said to trace back to the months before the wedding. Medical evaluations had confirmed that Meghan could not carry a child to term, whether due to prior procedures, genetic complications, or other undisclosed conditions. For most couples, surrogacy would have been a private choice, even a relief in the face of biological limitation. But for a royal couple, especially one under the intense scrutiny Meghan and Harry faced, the implications were political, cultural, and reputational. According to insiders, it was Harry who first raised the idea of complete secrecy. Having witnessed how brutally his mother was treated by the press and how mercilessly his wife was already being attacked, he resolved that no part of their family's creation would be up for public dissection. He allegedly said to Meghan, "They'll never leave us alone if they know. They'll say our children aren't real royals. They'll question everything." Meghan reportedly agreed. Together, they formed what one aide described as a wall of silence, a pact to hide the surrogacy completely and present the world with a believable, seamless narrative. This decision set off a chain of planning that involved not only hiring a surrogate but also crafting a pregnancy illusion so convincing that it could withstand close-up photographs, high-definition video, and intense public scrutiny. The couple employed a small, tightly controlled team of professionals who were reportedly made to sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements. These individuals were responsible for coordinating Meghan's wardrobe, managing her public appearances, and ensuring that no detail was left unaccounted for. The prosthetic bumps, according to one insider, came from a high-end film effects company that specialized in realistic body doubles. Meghan reportedly tested several models before selecting the ones she used for each trimester. But even with the most convincing props, the emotional toll of the performance began to weigh heavily on Harry. As a man raised under royal tradition, he had internalized a rigid sense of duty and honor. Lying to the world, especially about something as sacred as the birth of a child, was a burden he had not anticipated fully. In his mind, he justified the deceit as protection, as a shield for his wife and children. But as time passed, that justification eroded. People close to Harry say the strain became visible after Lilibet's birth. Unlike Archie, whose birth was surrounded by a frenzy of British press coverage and palace involvement, Lilibet's arrival was quieter, more controlled. But it was also more isolating. The couple, no longer working royals, lacked the institutional protection they once relied on. Public opinion had turned colder. The media was more aggressive. And within the confines of their California estate, Harry reportedly began to unravel. He started pulling away from public engagements. He became visibly tense in interviews, often stumbling or evading questions related to family life. Those around him noticed mood swings, periods of silence, and erratic behavior. According to a Montecito-based therapist who claims to have worked with clients in Harry's circle, the prince was experiencing a profound identity conflict fueled by the weight of sustaining a lie he no longer believed in. By late 2023, that conflict reached a tipping point. Sources claim Harry began drafting personal essays, some meant for a follow-up to his memoir Spare, others more therapeutic in nature. In these writings, he described the guilt he carried over misleading the world, over robbing his children of a transparent origin story, and over betraying the values of honesty and vulnerability he claimed to cherish. One passage from a leaked excerpt reportedly read, "I was always taught that honor matters more than anything, but I broke that for the sake of control, not just over the press, but over the truth. And now I look at my children, and I don't know if I've protected them or doomed them." Whether Harry intended for these words to become public is unclear. But they reflect a man caught between competing forces: love and duty, fear and integrity, control and collapse. Those who have spoken to him in recent months describe someone who feels both trapped and desperate for release. Perhaps most telling is the way Harry speaks about the surrogate herself. While never naming her, he is said to express gratitude and admiration for her sacrifice. At the same time, he reportedly regrets the way she was erased from the narrative. "She gave us life," he told one confidant, "and we made her invisible." These reflections signal more than just regret. They point to a man on the verge of reckoning. Harry's confession is not simply about a biological truth. It's about reclaiming control over a narrative that spiraled beyond his reach. It's about confronting the consequences of choices made under pressure and the realization that even the most well-intentioned lies have a shelf life. As this confession begins to ripple through the media, palace officials remain silent. Meghan, too, has not commented. But behind the silence, there is movement. Legal teams are reportedly preparing for potential fallout. Royal aides are bracing for renewed public scrutiny. And within the walls of Montecito, Prince Harry stands at the edge of a truth he can no longer run from. This is the beginning of a seismic shift, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the legacy of their children, the perception of the royal family, and the trust between public figures and the people they speak to. The next chapters will reveal how far the deception went, who helped construct it, and what happens when an illusion begins to collapse under the weight of reality. The decision to use a surrogate was never made lightly. According to those who claim to have been briefed in confidence, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle debated the option with great emotional tension and logistical anxiety. The choice wasn't just about building a family, it was about managing a narrative. And that narrative had to be airtight and vulnerable and, above all, believable. In the spring of 2018, shortly before their highly anticipated royal wedding, private medical consultations allegedly confirmed what Meghan had long suspected. Her chances of carrying a child to term were minimal. The medical reasons have never been disclosed, but multiple insiders suggest complications linked to prior procedures, hormonal imbalances, or reproductive abnormalities. Whatever the diagnosis, the conclusion was definitive. A natural pregnancy was not a viable path. For many, this kind of news would prompt grief, acceptance, and eventual adaptation. For Meghan and Harry, it opened a strategic door, one they knew they could never afford to walk through publicly. The reality of surrogacy was incompatible with the fairy tale they were trying to preserve. According to palace insiders, this was the moment a new plan began to take shape. It would require confidentiality at every level, both legal and human. It would mean excluding even close members of the royal household from key details. Most importantly, it would mean shaping a version of reality that was airtight and polished enough to pass under the intense lens of global media. The couple first turned to private consultants in California who specialized in high-profile surrogacy arrangements. Meghan's pre-royal life had given her access to elite Hollywood networks, many of which had discreetly managed pregnancies for public figures. These consultants were not new to confidentiality. They dealt in anonymity and airtight contracts, often facilitating births that the public never traced back to anyone but the celebrity parents themselves. Working with one of these consultants, Harry and Meghan allegedly selected a surrogate from a short list of candidates who had been thoroughly screened, physically, psychologically, and contractually. The woman, whose identity remains protected, was in her late 20s, of European descent, and had previously carried twins for a tech executive's family in San Francisco. She was selected not just for her medical profile, but for her willingness to disappear. The contract she signed, according to those with knowledge of its contents, was among the most restrictive ever drafted in a U.S. surrogacy case. It included severe penalties for speaking to the media, lifetime anonymity clauses, and control over all communications with her immediate family during the gestation period. In return, she received compensation well above market rate, reportedly in the low seven figures, and a package of legal and health protections rivaling those offered to A-list Hollywood stars. But even with the surrogate selected and under contract, a far greater challenge remained: how to integrate this off-the-books pregnancy into a public life of cameras, state visits, and scrutiny. To bridge that gap, a second team was assembled, separate from the surrogacy consultants. This team, consisting of legal advisors, PR strategists, stylists, and a trusted handful of palace aides, was given a singular task: simulate a royal pregnancy from the outside, with no detectable flaws. Sources claim that this group operated out of a secure annex within the Sussex's Frogmore Cottage residence during their time in the UK. Every aspect of Meghan's routine was adjusted: schedules, wardrobe, transportation, public speaking engagements. Stylists were trained on how to work with prosthetic bumps of varying sizes. They knew when to switch models, how to tape clothing to maintain a believable silhouette, and how to adjust posture for public photos. Makeup artists, too, were instructed to use subtle contouring techniques to suggest weight changes and fatigue typically associated with pregnancy. The plan even extended to scent. According to one royal staffer, diffusers were placed in rooms Meghan was about to enter, emitting mild pregnancy-safe essential oils like lavender and bergamot to simulate the smells often used in prenatal aromatherapy. These details were not essential, but in the minds of the strategists, they reinforced the illusion for anyone visiting in person. As the first public engagements rolled around, the surrogate had already begun her pregnancy in a secure, undisclosed location in Northern California. She was monitored by private physicians, and her medical records were kept off public networks. All communication with Meghan and Harry was routed through encrypted, intermediary channels. No phone calls. No direct messages. Only tightly scheduled, documented updates delivered through attorneys. During these early months, Meghan maintained her usual grace in public. She glowed, cradled her bump, answered select questions from reporters, and never once betrayed the stress of orchestrating the deception behind the scenes. Those who interacted with her directly, charity workers, event organizers, journalists, saw only what they were meant to see. There were no slip-ups. Not yet. Inside palace walls, however, things were becoming tense. A select few aides began to suspect that the situation wasn't as simple as it seemed. One particularly sharp staff member noticed inconsistencies in Meghan's calendar, odd cancellations of doctor appointments that had never been confirmed with local clinics, silent rides to undisclosed locations with only her personal assistant in the car. Another aide grew curious when Meghan declined to allow any internal palace photographer to document private moments during the pregnancy, a break from royal tradition. These suspicions were noted but not acted upon. In the royal institution, loyalty and discretion are prized above inquiry. Staff are trained not to ask questions beyond their rank. Those who did were gently moved to other assignments or restructured under vague HR language. Meanwhile, Meghan doubled down. The prosthetic bump strategy was executed with remarkable precision. During public events, she wore specially tailored coats designed to amplify or minimize her silhouette based on the timeline she wished to present. On days when she needed to appear more advanced in pregnancy, padding was added to her cheeks and hips to suggest weight gain. On lighter days, form-fitting dresses emphasized a neater, more athletic profile, always within the bounds of plausibility. But as the real surrogate approached her due date, complications arose. One leaked document suggests that there was a sudden shift in strategy due to premature labor. The surrogate gave birth earlier than expected, forcing Harry and Meghan to revise the timeline of Archie's birth. This explains, some insiders believe, why the palace press release about Meghan going into labor was issued hours after the baby had actually been delivered. The baby was flown privately to the UK under extraordinary security. A pediatric nurse, hand-selected by the couple, accompanied the child. Once Archie was safely in Windsor, Meghan and Harry staged the brief press event where they introduced him to the world. Meghan's body was concealed under a carefully cut white dress, and she spoke in hushed tones about the experience of motherhood. No press questions were allowed. The event was brief, controlled, and thoroughly rehearsed. In hindsight, it all made sense. The absence of visible postpartum symptoms, the avoidance of media follow-ups, the lack of medical personnel during the birth announcement. But at the time, the world simply marveled at the adorable infant, the poised mother, and the proud father. After the initial success of the first pregnancy illusion, the process was repeated almost identically for Lilibet. This time, the surrogate arrangement was reportedly even more insulated. The birth took place in Santa Barbara, but no hospital records were ever released. The announcement was made via a statement on the couple's Archwell website with minimal detail. The royal family was said to be informed, but no formal statements were made from Buckingham Palace. One striking difference, however, was the reaction behind palace walls. By the time Lilibet was born, rumors had begun to circulate among senior royals and their staff. Several had heard conflicting timelines from Harry and Meghan. Others had questioned the absence of medical protocol, especially given the couple's insistence on privacy that exceeded even the most security-conscious of previous royal births. Princess Anne, known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense demeanor, allegedly confronted a senior royal aide and asked flat out, "Was there ever a pregnancy?" The aide, bound by confidentiality, refused to answer. But the question alone, voiced within the walls of the firm, was an admission that the illusion was cracking. Behind closed doors, the surrogate plan had succeeded, but not without cost. Relationships were strained. Staff became disillusioned. And within Harry himself, the weight of the decision began to accumulate. The success of the ruse did not bring peace. Instead, it created a private chamber of anxiety, guilt, and self-doubt from which he would not easily escape. As we continue this investigation, we move next into the mechanics of that illusion, the prosthetics, the choreography, and the details that convinced millions of people around the world they were witnessing something sacred and real. To the average observer, pregnancy is one of the few human conditions that is both private and publicly displayed. The changes in posture, gait, appearance, and even facial expressions often tell a complete story before a single word is spoken. It is not something that is easy to fake, not convincingly, not consistently, and certainly not under the level of scrutiny Meghan Markle faced as a duchess and global media figure. Yet, by many accounts now surfacing from insiders and experts, that is precisely what was done. The prosthetic bump was not an amateur invention. It was sourced from a company specializing in hyperrealistic silicone body parts used in the entertainment and prosthetics industries. These devices are typically designed for actors portraying pregnant women in television dramas, medical training simulations, and undercover social experiments. They come with lifelike skin textures, heat sensitivity, and anatomical correctness. Some are weighted to mimic the feel and movement of a real pregnancy. Others are hollow and designed to collapse for more portable storage. According to sources with knowledge of the logistics, Meghan had access to at least 4 versions of the bump. These were not purchased from online costume shops. They were custom designed, tested, and adjusted based on photographic trial runs done in private. Each model represented a different stage of pregnancy, from the subtle rounding of the first trimester to the prominent projection associated with the 8th month. These bumps could be swapped discreetly, depending on what message Meghan and her team wanted to convey to the public at any given time. A critical aspect of this deception lay in clothing. Maternity fashion isn't merely aesthetic, it plays a key role in how the body's transformation is perceived. Meghan's wardrobe was reportedly built around the specifications of the prosthetics. Designers commissioned custom pieces that allowed the bumps to sit naturally against the fabric without bunching or stretching. Seams were reinforced. Inner padding was subtly added in some areas and removed in others. Nothing was left to chance. One former stylist who worked indirectly on fittings, under the condition of anonymity, recalled seeing foam inserts laid out during wardrobe consultations. They weren't just props. These were meticulously designed to blend with her natural form. They had skin tone layering. You couldn't tell unless you physically touched them, and even then, it wasn't obvious. Hair and makeup also played subtle roles in completing the illusion. During supposed later stages of pregnancy, Meghan's cheeks were contoured to appear fuller. Minimalistic, neutral-toned makeup was used to evoke a soft maternal glow, while hairstyles were chosen to draw attention away from the abdomen. Her team carefully calculated every visual aspect of her appearance. Photos had to give the impression of a woman undergoing real physiological transformation, yet still polished and radiant. Yet, for all its brilliance, the operation was not flawless. The most persistent critics of Meghan's pregnancy narrative often reference a particular clip, footage from her visit to the National Theatre in January 2019. In that video, Meghan squats fluidly to greet a young child. The movement is surprisingly smooth and unencumbered for a woman said to be entering her 3rd trimester. There's no hesitation, no wince, no need for assistance. Moments later, she stands upright without support. The video went viral. Online communities dissected it frame by frame, pointing out how the bump neither shifted nor reacted to gravity. Another moment of controversy occurred during Meghan's appearance at the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. Photographs showed her walking in a form-fitting dress with an unusually sharp edge at the bottom of her bump, creating what some critics called the fold. Viewers claimed the silhouette didn't resemble the organic curvature of a pregnant abdomen. Others speculated the angle of the bump seemed off-center. Once again, defenders argued it was simply a trick of fabric or camera perspective. But the questions kept coming. These inconsistencies did not deter Meghan. In fact, they seemed to reinforce her resolve. According to insiders, she became obsessive about rehearsing gestures, poses, and walk cycles. She reviewed footage from previous events to refine her movements. She paid close attention to how the bump moved when she sat or turned. If something didn't look authentic, the footage was quietly buried. Some royal watchers noted that videos of certain engagements vanished from official channels within days, replaced with carefully edited highlight reels. The question many now ask is, why not simply tell the truth? In some ways, the answer lies in control. Meghan and Harry had become deeply skeptical of media narratives and institutional power structures. To them, transparency didn't guarantee understanding. In their eyes, announcing a surrogacy would have invited attacks on their children's legitimacy, fueled tabloid frenzy, and created an endless cycle of defense. Faking the pregnancy, on the other hand, gave them a sense of agency. They could present the world with a story that aligned with their desires, an image of a young royal couple doing things their way, but still within traditional expectations. That control extended to the digital sphere. Every photo released on their Instagram was handpicked. Filters were used sparingly to maintain realism, but strategic cropping and angling ensured the bump always looked organic. No spontaneous footage was allowed. Camera crews attending events were briefed beforehand to avoid awkward close-ups or unflattering angles. Paparazzi were subtly misdirected to prevent uncontrolled, candid shots. In cases where raw footage did leak, public relations staff were quick to redirect attention to polished press materials. Even voice played a role. Meghan adjusted her vocal tone during later stages of pregnancy, speaking more slowly and softly during interviews to mimic the fatigue and serenity often associated with expectant mothers. Her public statements revolved around new beginnings, family values, and the joy of motherhood. She never outright stated she was carrying the baby, but her wording always implied it. The brilliance of the illusion lay in its omission. She never told a direct lie. She simply curated a version of reality that allowed everyone else to believe what they wanted to see. For a while, it worked. The media fell in line. News anchors cooed over her fashion. Tabloids predicted baby names. Columnists praised her poise and natural maternal energy. But the illusion began to falter when Meghan's second pregnancy, announced in 2021, followed the same script. This time, the public was less forgiving. The pandemic had made people more perceptive, more attuned to inconsistencies, more cynical about celebrity. Once again, photos were curated, interviews were rare, and no delivery hospital was disclosed. But online commentary was sharper. Questions became harder to ignore. Commentators noticed identical behavior patterns from the first pregnancy. The same bump shapes, the same walk cycles, the same wardrobe tricks. Behind the scenes, those tasked with managing the image were struggling. Palace officials reportedly became more vocal in questioning timelines. Family members, particularly Princess and Prince Edward, allegedly began requesting more concrete information. But Harry and Meghan refused to answer directly. They remained firm in their public narrative. Two biological children, both born naturally, both part of the Sussex legacy. One insider described the internal palace reaction as a mix of disbelief and resignation. There was a point where no one believed the pregnancies were real. But what could they do? Call her a liar? Demand a DNA test? It would have created a constitutional crisis. The illusion, by then, had become a problem too delicate to confront. Meghan's bump was no longer just a personal prop. It had become a symbol of defiance, a tool of brand building, and a shield against public skepticism. To admit it was fake would be to unravel not just a story but an empire of image. But Harry, in his private reflections, had begun to break. Sources close to him say the more polished the illusion became, the more it tore at him inside. Watching his children grow up under a story he knew wasn't fully true haunted him. He feared what would happen when they grew older and started asking questions. He feared the moment when the world would demand answers he no longer had the energy to deny. The prosthetic bump was never just a costume. It was a barrier between truth and public expectation. It was a silent pact between two people trying to protect their privacy and a gamble that the truth would stay hidden forever. But illusions, no matter how masterfully performed, always carry a risk. The moment one thread is pulled, the entire tapestry can begin to unravel. In the next section, we will explore how the palace itself played a role in enabling this illusion. Whether through willful ignorance, strategic silence, or covert support, the institution designed to uphold truth and tradition may have become, in this case, a silent co-conspirator in a grand deception. The British royal family has long operated behind a carefully constructed wall of protocol, secrecy, and strategic omission. From the way statements are crafted to how family members appear in public, nearly every move is choreographed to maintain an aura of dignity, continuity, and trust in the crown. It's a system that relies on plausible deniability, selective transparency, and an unspoken code. Never explain, never complain. But when it came to the alleged surrogate pregnancies of Meghan Markle, that machine of silence didn't just turn a blind eye, it arguably helped sustain the illusion. Inside Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Clarence House, information is currency, and managing that information is an elite skill passed down through generations of courtiers. These senior aides, often drawn from backgrounds in government, diplomacy, and military intelligence, are not mere assistants. They are gatekeepers of narrative and perception. When Meghan's pregnancy was first announced in October 2018, the institution reacted with mechanical efficiency. A press statement was drafted, vetted, and published within hours. The Queen and senior royals were said to be delighted. The machinery had activated. But even within the halls of power, doubts were already beginning to emerge. According to sources with direct knowledge of internal discussions, not all senior aides were convinced by the story. There were inconsistencies in the timeline. Meghan and Harry had allegedly informed some royal members long before the official announcement. Others, like Princess and Prince Edward, were reportedly notified at the last minute, through press briefings rather than personal communication. It's important to understand that the royal family operates with tiers of access. Not everyone within the palace knows everything. There are compartments, roles, and strict chains of command. This allowed Harry and Meghan a limited degree of independence in the early months of their marriage. At the time, their household, referred to internally as the Sussex team, was semi-autonomous. They had their own communications officers, event planners, and press strategists. This independence allowed them to operate with greater secrecy than previous royal couples. However, by early 2019, tension was rising between the Sussexes and senior courtiers. Multiple staff members had quietly raised concerns about the lack of medical oversight. In prior royal pregnancies, there were routine briefings, at least internally, on expected due dates, hospital coordination, and medical teams involved. With Meghan, those briefings were either missing or shrouded in mystery. Aides were told that she was using private services, but no further information was given. One veteran courtier allegedly confided to a colleague, "We don't even know which doctors are involved." That's never happened before. Even the Queen had named medical staff ready for public confirmation. Their concerns, however, never reached the public. They were smothered by the palace's internal rulebook: shield the crown, protect the narrative, suppress internal discord. Behind the scenes, subtle adjustments were made to accommodate the couple's desire for secrecy. Media access to Meghan's events was restricted. Briefings were shortened or canceled. Photographers were rotated more frequently to prevent pattern analysis of her bump's size. And whenever rumors about inconsistencies surfaced online, palace representatives simply ignored them, refusing to comment, confirm, or deny. This silence, though seemingly neutral, functioned as quiet validation. Then came the moment that shocked even the more seasoned staff: the announcement of Archie's birth. Rather than the typical protocol, in which the media was alerted as labor began, Meghan and Harry issued a press release stating she had gone into labor hours after Archie had allegedly already been born. The birth location was unclear. Conflicting reports emerged. Some suggested a private wing at Portland Hospital. Others claimed a secret location outside London. Photographers, waiting outside the Lindo wing as they had for Diana and Kate, realized too late they had been duped. Internally, palace aides scrambled to regain control. Emails flew between departments. Communications directors were pulled into urgent meetings. The Royal Rota, the system by which select media outlets are granted official access, was suddenly bypassed. No one knew what was happening. For an institution known for its strict schedules and formality, the chaos was unprecedented. When Archie was finally introduced to the world, it wasn't through a formal hospital exit. It was in St. George's Hall at Windsor Castle, in a controlled and tightly scripted photo call. Only one camera crew was allowed. No follow-up questions were permitted. Meghan, wrapped in a white coat dress, appeared radiant, but the scene was missing the familiar markers of postpartum reality. Her figure was slim. Her demeanor was composed. And there was something in the atmosphere, something cautious, artificial, almost too perfect. Staffers who had long supported royal births were bewildered. There were no signs of medical personnel, no statements from attending doctors, nothing that confirmed anything beyond what Harry and Meghan said. Yet the palace, instead of correcting these gaps, absorbed them. Silence remained the official policy. What followed was even more revealing. Internal staff who voiced questions were either reassigned or quietly removed from the Sussex team. One assistant, according to leaked correspondence, was dismissed after expressing concerns over the legitimacy of the birth documentation. Another was transferred to a less visible position within the royal press office after asking whether legal arrangements had been made regarding surrogacy disclosures. At this point, the palace's silence transformed into complicity. Rather than challenge the Sussexes, senior royals chose avoidance. Sources suggest that Charles, ever the political tactician, believed that pushing Harry could fracture the family irreparably. The Queen, known for her constitutional neutrality, reportedly instructed her advisors to maintain decorum and focus on the bigger picture. William, furious in private, said little publicly. Only behind closed doors did he allegedly express frustration. If this were anyone else in the family, we wouldn't tolerate this level of manipulation. And yet, the palace did tolerate it. The reasons were not just familial, they were strategic. Meghan and Harry were global assets. Their appeal among younger audiences, Americans, and progressives was seen as essential to modernizing the monarchy. Even amid growing tensions, the firm needed their participation. Scandal, at that stage, would have shattered the image of a united royal family and invited scrutiny into other institutional failings. By the time Meghan announced her second pregnancy in 2021, the palace was better prepared. There were fewer expectations of tradition. The couple was no longer active royals. They lived overseas. The pressure to coordinate logistics was less intense. And yet, the same pattern repeated. No medical details, no hospital records, no press access. A black and white photo of Meghan lying on Harry's lap with a clearly defined bump circulated widely, but once again, no confirmation of how or where the child would be delivered. Internally, some aides had begun compiling private notes. These would later serve as documentation for future inquiries or legal matters. At least 2 former staff members have stated they were encouraged not to dig and to defer entirely to the Sussexes on personal matters. In a royal institution where nothing is ever truly personal, this marked a historic shift. The cover-up, if it can be called that, was not built on active lies but on silence, misdirection, and passive enabling. The palace never stated Meghan was pregnant. They allowed the public and media to reach that conclusion and never corrected them. They never confirmed medical teams or hospital arrangements. They simply withheld the information until the narrative was established. And when staff asked questions that threatened the illusion, they were silenced not with threats, but with reassignment. In this way, the monarchy, knowingly or not, became a shield for deception. Its traditions, its mechanisms of discretion, and its obsession with optics were exploited to maintain an elaborate fiction. It raises deeper questions. What happens when an institution built on continuity and trust is used to protect illusion? Can it survive the revelation that it aided in misleading the public for years? And if the palace can be complicit in this, what else has been hidden under the guise of royal privacy? The next chapter will turn inward, to Meghan herself. What motivated her to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? What psychological and strategic calculations were made in crafting not only the narrative, but her role in it? How did her background in media, branding, and performance inform the choices she made? For Meghan Markle, image was never a passive byproduct of public life. It was the product itself. Before she married into royalty, before she stood at the altar beside Prince Harry, Meghan had already spent nearly 2 decades mastering the art of performance. First as an actress working her way up the Hollywood hierarchy, then as a lifestyle blogger, brand ambassador, and voice for women's empowerment. In every stage of her evolution, Control over her narrative was both survival strategy and personal doctrine. So, when faced with the reality that she could not bear children biologically, her response wasn't to surrender to vulnerability. It was to double down on control. To understand Meghan's motivations for maintaining the illusion of pregnancy, one must first examine the framework of her life before royalty. Long before entering the global spotlight, Meghan built her public identity through carefully curated platforms. Her now-defunct blog, The Tig, offered a picture of aspirational lifestyle, wellness, feminism, travel, and food, all filtered through the lens of a worldly, graceful woman. Even then, friends described her as meticulous about her public image. She was known to manage her own photo shoots, rewrite copy for press kits, and veto unflattering material before publication. In Hollywood, where authenticity is often a mask worn convincingly, Meghan had been trained to build a persona that could survive criticism. She learned to anticipate press coverage, to preempt scandal, and to react not with spontaneity, but with calculation. Those who worked with her on set noted how she never let her guard down, even in downtime between filming. Everything, every smile, every angle, every gesture, was consciously shaped. So when she transitioned into the role of Duchess of Sussex, it wasn't simply a leap into royalty, it was an evolution of brand. And in this new environment, the stakes were dramatically higher. Her decisions no longer influenced just magazine coverage or publicist approval. They shaped global perceptions of an institution that had existed for over 1,000 years. It was a rare opportunity to leave a permanent mark on history, but it came with expectations she could never afford to fail. Among the most central of those expectations was motherhood. The monarchy is built on lineage. The act of producing heirs is not only a personal milestone, it is a constitutional function. Meghan was stepping into a position that, whether she liked it or not, came with the unspoken requirement of childbirth. For Kate Middleton, this path had been grueling but ultimately successful. She produced 3 children under relentless media pressure. For Meghan, the challenge was more complicated. Her private medical reality collided head-on with the public role she was expected to fulfill. Sources close to her claim that the idea of surrogacy was not repugnant to Meghan on moral grounds. What troubled her was the narrative loss. If the public knew she used a surrogate, she feared the core of her image would collapse. She would no longer be seen as the woman who had it all, a fairy tale marriage, a royal title, and the miracle of motherhood. Instead, she risked being pitted, dissected, or worse, accused of being less than other royal women who had carried their children to term. This fear was not entirely unfounded. In royal history, the perception of feminine virtue and strength has often been tied to physical endurance, especially through childbirth. Diana was praised for her natural birth with William. The Queen herself was lauded for her stoicism through 4 pregnancies. To relinquish that experience, Meghan believed, would place her on a separate tier, a woman whose motherhood was facilitated rather than earned in the eyes of tradition. Thus, the choice to fake the pregnancy became not merely a lie, but a reinforcement of control over her public image. It was the ultimate act of narrative protection. Through it, she could still appear as the glowing mother-to-be, still wear the fitted maternity dresses, still participate in baby-centric events and charities without inviting questions about authenticity or difference. This commitment to maintaining the illusion was so intense that it began to affect her behavior in private, according to aides who worked in Frogmore Cottage during her pregnancy with Archie. Meghan reportedly insisted on being treated as a pregnant woman at all times, even in staff interactions. Special meal requests were made to match cravings she wasn't biologically experiencing. Temperature preferences in her residence were adjusted based on trimester guidelines. Visitors were asked to speak softly, in recognition of her delicate state. All of this, despite no evidence of an actual pregnancy. Her obsession with optics also bled into press interactions. Meghan's team carefully controlled photo opportunities. They approved only photographers known to avoid unflattering shots. They arranged interviews where pregnancy could be hinted at but never probed in detail. Even within private media circles, journalists were discouraged from asking questions about due dates or hospital plans. Everything was off-limits, they were told. According to one senior UK journalist, an attempt to publish an article examining the unusual privacy surrounding Meghan's pregnancy was blocked by editorial executives after receiving a strong warning from palace liaisons. The implication was clear. Challenging the narrative would be interpreted as disrespect to the royal family. The fear of backlash, both legal and reputational, was enough to muzzle curiosity. But Meghan's motivations weren't purely about protecting her image from the outside world. Insiders suggest that there was an internal, psychological component, one rooted in the fear of losing her sense of control. Since entering royal life, she had encountered an institution that demanded obedience, where tradition superseded individuality. The bump became, in many ways, a symbol of resistance. By controlling the conditions under which her motherhood would be perceived, she took back autonomy from a system that constantly tried to define her. There were moments when this control bordered on fixation. A former household staffer recalled an incident during a fitting for a charity appearance. Meghan allegedly spent nearly an hour debating whether the curve of the bump looked authentic enough under a silk dress. She kept asking us if it looked believable from every angle, the source said. She paced in front of mirrors. She asked for video from different heights. It wasn't vanity, it was fear of exposure. This fear also translated into her dealings with the royal family. Behind the scenes, Meghan was increasingly sensitive to perceived slights from palace staff or other royals. If someone questioned her condition indirectly, by asking about due dates or hospital choices, she would respond with cold precision or deflect entirely. Over time, even casual interactions became tense. Aides were walking on eggshells. Harry, deeply protective of Meghan, reportedly supported every decision she made. But friends say he began to struggle with the intensity of it all. He saw Meghan retreat further into her curated world. Every room was a set. Every appearance was a scene. Even family dinners, according to one source, felt scripted. She was in character all the time, they said. There was never a moment when you could just be relaxed and talk about normal things. Everything revolved around maintaining the story. But stories, even the most carefully controlled, cannot withstand the weight of reality forever. As the cracks began to form, through errant photos, inconsistent timelines, and whispers from the staff, Meghan doubled down. She insisted the team not respond to critics. She forbade any internal investigations into rumors about the bump. She even began distancing herself from longtime aides who, she believed, were no longer fully aligned with her vision. The image she had spent years building of the independent, strong, trailblazing Duchess was at risk. Admitting surrogacy would mean admitting weakness, vulnerability, and perhaps the loss of narrative control. So she clung tighter. Even after stepping back from royal duties and relocating to California, the illusion persisted. The Netflix documentary, the podcast interviews, the children's book all carried subtle references to her experience as a mother, but none addressed the truth. In these carefully edited narratives, Meghan continued to present herself as someone who had carried and birthed 2 children. And for a while, it worked. For a while, the story held. But time, scrutiny, and conscience have begun to unravel it. The next section of this investigation will examine the impact of this secret on Harry himself. While Meghan choreographed the external performance, Harry bore the internal cost. The guilt, the contradictions, and the emotional strain of protecting a falsehood that violated everything he once stood for.